the kind of misinformation I see spreading within veganism today, sometimes under the head of drama, under this new sport we've made out of slandering people. The kind of disinformation I see scares me because I see people playing the game who have lost the ability to distinguish between truth and fiction. And there are people who lie maliciously, who know that they're telling lies, but there are also people who are not really aware that they're lying. They've lost track at the dotted line, or they've forgotten who made up what, or that's just their personality type. They can't swim in a sea of misinformation and keep their heads above water. Now, some of you may know I used to be a scholar of Buddhism a long time ago. There was one other guy, I guess I'm not going to name him, but I could. There was a guy who became not just a scholar of Buddhism, but a professor. He got his PhD, and he became a university professor of Buddhism. And he had to resign his job. He had to quit his job as a professor, destroyed his career, because he became sympathetic to so-called revisionist historians of World War II and the Holocaust. To be blunt, he briefly endorsed Holocaust denialism. This is a sad and interesting story for the following reason. Like many people involved in Buddhism, I think he was a bit of a mystic in his inclination. He said of himself in an interview that since his childhood, he loved the feeling of unraveling a mystery, of perhaps engaging in conspiracy theory thinking. And probably that's one of the things that drew him into research on Buddhist philosophy. The feeling that, like unraveling a yarn, figuring out a puzzle or a mystery, something intriguing about what made Buddhist philosophy difficult to understand. Now, other people also told me, by the way, that his scholarship was garbage, and I saw some warning signs of that too, but hey, let's be generous. It's not the point of this video. Whether or not he was a good scholar of Buddhism is another question. And whether or not that's the skill set or attitude that you need to be a good scholar of Buddhism is another question. But the same spirit of inquiry drew him sincerely into the company of people who were trading in lies and half-truths and misinformation, in so-called revisionist history, in Holocaust denialism, etc. And he couldn't keep his head above water. And briefly, for a short period of his life, he became a believer in these lies about World War II, the Holocaust, Judaism, anti-Semitism, etc. But pretty quickly, he also figured it out. He figured out, some of the claims are archaeological. Some of them actually have to do with digging up human remains. You don't have to be a genius to work your way through that web of lies and verify some of those facts and realize how wrong these things are. So he did, but too late. His career as a scholar of Buddhism was forever destroyed, and his career as a professor was destroyed, and he went on to make some really bizarre and eccentric websites that, I don't know what else he was capable of, but I guess he went on from one crazy conspiracy theory to the next. What I see going on now in veganism, you think you can't be disappointed because your expectations are so low. But I am disappointed. And I am worried. And I'm worried for this same reason. I see people who are swimming and they don't know what's true and what's false anymore. And they don't know who's intentionally playing a game, who's making up stories, and who's being sincere, and who's just crazy. And I don't know, did other political movements in the history of the world have to deal with this problem? Maybe to some extent. Did they have to deal with it so rapidly? Did they have to deal with it at this speed, at this intensity? I don't even feel the need to defend myself against most of this stuff. What is it in human nature or in these people's character that makes it entertaining for them to say that I don't have a university diploma. Like, why would that lie even be entertaining or interesting? I do have a university diploma, and it's not something I brag about. It's just not a great accomplishment. It's nothing. I don't know. I might be more proud that I won a 3-legged race or something. It's just not a big deal to me. Lies from the most banal. I mean, some of them are mean-spirited, but some of them are just meaningless. I'm worried. I'm worried about where that's going. A few days ago, one of my fellow vegans said to me, very sincerely, that this was the worst community she'd ever been involved in. She used the word community. I avoid that word because I don't think we are a community, as you know. And I had to say back, well, for me, it's not. I've seen worse. And I alluded to my experience with ecological politics, the Green Party, with the Canadian left wing in general. I do not identify as left wing, but I know a lot about the left wing. And talked about Buddhism. How bad does it get within Buddhism? Really bad. Most of you don't know this. I've written one article about it. Most of you won't believe me when I say this. But the origins of the Nazi ideology are actually linked to Buddhist scholarship. There's one guy called Max Muller who gets blamed for it. He's partly to blame, but it's kind of just an accident of history that he's ended up being the famous name that all the blame gets hung on. But really the invention of several crucial elements of Nazi ideology is linked to Western English language Buddhist scholarship. So from the very start, you could say that fascism within European Buddhism, it predates the Nazi Party. This is not the only ugly, ideologically loaded element of what goes on in Buddhism. To give another very interesting example, there is also a link right at the root, right at its basis, between Theravada Buddhism and Satanism, by which I mean British Satanism. So I'm not talking about ancient Israel. I'm talking about modern England and the reinvention of Satanism, or first invention of Satanism. Satanism as a new religious movement. It is very directly linked to Theravada Buddhism in England. So the guy known as Aleister Crowley, his best friend, became a Theravada Buddhist monk, and Crowley's philosophy is in very large part an adaptation of Theravada Buddhist philosophy. I know it may come as a surprise, but it's true. So there are a lot of these kind of weird things. And that's even if you're a legitimate scholar who knows about the legitimate history, textual philosophy, etc. Those links are there. How bad does it get? There was one guy, I could name him. He still has a YouTube channel. He's still active. I'm going to choose not to name him. There was one guy who, let's say 10 years ago, was a major well-known lecturer in Buddhism in Canada. Unfortunately, you can figure out who I'm talking about, but please don't Google this. And let's say 5 years ago, I noticed in one of his videos, and I avoid him. I didn't want to talk to him because there was some slightly insane stuff in his approach to Buddhism, and I just didn't have any reason to. It wouldn't be rewarding for me. But I remember I picked out a few things he said, and I could tell implicitly that he was influenced by fascism, by Nazi ideology within the Buddhist world. And when I heard that, I thought I wanted to talk to him because I was interested, done research in this area. I was interested in knowing, was he himself aware of it? Or was he one of these people like I've been describing? Was he just swimming in this biased literature? Was he swimming in this junk scholarship? Was he in a situation where he didn't know the difference between good scholarship and bad scholarship, between truth and lies, between biased and unbiased sources on this kind of philosophy? Philosophy, history, language, etc., etc. That was what I wanted to know. So I got in touch with him, and I talked to him. at that time, there was nothing on his YouTube channel or nothing in his web presence that openly identified him as a fascist or a Nazi or as a right-winger even. And he formerly was married to a woman who was not white, who was a non-white person. I don't think they had kids, but, you know, obviously that's the sort of thing where I don't think he'd be allowed to be a member of most, you know, most of those kinds of political groups. But anyway, and like many Buddhists, he lived in Asia, etc., etc. In the years that followed after my conversation with him, his web presence gradually transformed, and he became more and more openly, you know, the most ridiculous kind of hyper-fascist, you know. You can meet Buddhists who misrepresent Buddhism as supporting communism, as supporting Bolshevism, revolution, total equality, and end to slavery, upliftment of women, uplifting the poor, uplifting the workers. And you can meet Buddhists who interpret Buddhism as justifying slavery and fascism and racism and the caste system. But what I hated dealing with in Buddhism was that miasma of people who didn't know the difference and couldn't know the difference between truth and fiction. It's dangerous, and you can't even debate with it. And there's no clear way forward. It's just sad, and it's scary, and it's demoralizing to deal with. And I don't want veganism to end up in that same state, you know. We don't have 2,500 years of superstition. We barely have 25 years of rational secular discourse here. And yet, look at what we're becoming. Look what we've become. You know, I've seen a mythology develop around me and change within a few months. I've seen people seriously argue that I never lived in Laos, that I never lived in Cambodia, that that was a false story made up about me by the CIA, a backstory. I've seen people seriously claim that I'm being employed by the meat and dairy industry to destroy veganism from within. I've seen one mythology after another. I've seen the mythology that I'm a millionaire. I've seen the mythology that I'm poor, that I'm broke, that I'm somehow stealing money because I'm so poor. In a space of months. Did other political movements have to deal with this? Maybe. Did they have to deal with it so rapidly? And did they deal with it? You know, in terms of anti-Semitism, still to this day, you'll find Russians, especially Russians, who passionately argue that Lenin, the dictator, important figure in the history of communism, that Lenin was secretly Jewish, and that the whole history of communism can be explained by this hidden fact. But there has to be some verifiable source. There has to be some referent. There has to be some way for the bullshit to stop. There has to be some point at which people sit down and say, no, Lenin was not Jewish, and this anti-Semitic approach to history doesn't explain anything, doesn't solve anything. And, you know, obviously when you get into something like Buddhism, when you get into something like communism, when you get into the realm of faith, you lose all those moorings pretty quick. So that's all I can share with you in this video. I'm worried, and I'm not worried for myself. Who I am, what I care about, my passion comes across in these videos clearly enough, no matter how many lies people tell about me. I have total confidence in myself and my message. What I don't have confidence in is the future of veganism in the next 30 years. These are the raw materials we have to work with. I once said to Vegan Cheetah's audience when I was in his chat room, in a live chat, for better or for worse, you people are the future of veganism. for better or for worse, we have to take that opportunity seriously. And in some ways, in terms of the nonsense going on right now, we have to take that warning seriously. I don't want to think about how much worse it's going to get.